There has to be a way to prepare for recitals that doesn't lead to a lot of stress, whether this is on the admin side for you or the practice side for your students. And thankfully there is. I'm going to be sharing activities using actual songs that are going to fall under three general categories for practice that will help your students prepare for an upcoming piano recital. And because I know that you have a million things on your recital to-do list, none of these ideas will require you to do anything extra during your admin time. They all happen during lesson. If we haven't met before, I'm Rosemarie. I'm an online piano teacher and studio owner, composer, mom, and owner of The Unfinished Lesson. I'm always on the lookout for teaching strategies and admin tips and tricks that help me streamline because I want a life outside of the job that I do very much love. At the end of this video, I'll be sharing some resources that you can use as you're preparing your students for an online piano recital. The key here is all of these resources, once you have them, you're using them immediately. I don't want extra work on you. I certainly don't want extra work, so you'll be able to use these right away. So be sure to watch to the end. So category number one is make it fun or fun activities. The Rabbit in the Garden is an early elementary piece, and oftentimes with younger students, I want to get them off the bench. Their attention span isn't super long. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the melody with our feet. So step, step, hop, step, step, hop, step, hop, stay put. Okay? Now we're going to do our left hand, which is tap, pop, tap, pop, tap, pop, tap, pop. Sorry, that last one was 2 pops. All right, now we got to put it together. So we've got tap, pop, tap, pop, tap, pop, hold it. For Jake Meets the Jackrabbit, this one is definitely a story-based piece. And what you could do is have a little stuffed animal, or if your student has a pet dog, even better. So what you would want to do is just make sure that your little stuffed animal or the pet is close to the piano, and this is a great way for them to practice. Farewell, Old Friend is a piece that is a little like the Lord of the Rings music. And so if your student really loves that kind of music, there's a couple options here. You could have fun talking about what scene from the book or movies that they think it came from, or you could get them to do a comic strip or a short story or some piece of artwork that would go with the song. This is, again, just geared towards your students that are maybe a little bit more on the writing or artistic side, that they could do that. And your film buffs, then they would love being able to figure out what scene it came from. For Waltz Under the Stars, this is a modern take on a waltz. The Viennese waltz would actually be a perfect off-the-bench activity to do with your student because the Viennese waltz, the actual steps, are designed for a much faster tempo. I would only recommend this if you and your student feel comfortable dancing. I was doing this, and yes, I could keep up with the song, but I do not feel comfortable showing you that on camera. I would attempt it with a student, and we would have a good laugh, but not for posterity's sake on YouTube. Sorry. A Life Lived. This one was so much fun to compose, and I actually played it at one of our recitals, my studio recitals. I would recommend listen to the music of Paul McCartney, Elton John, and Billy Joel. These were the inspiration for the song, and so you and your student could really talk about what makes their music unique, what draws the student in, and what can they take inspiration from. So Paul McCartney has written many different genres of music. He tends to love writing love songs. What elements of Paul McCartney's music are they maybe hearing in the music or that they could bring into it? For Elton John, I mean, of course, we know the outfits. The outfits are amazing, right? But he has a really unique way of approaching chords and lyrics. Looking at those, maybe there's a particular chord or series of chords within the piece that the student could bring out. For Billy Joel, he is an incredible storyteller of working class and just everyday stories of life. His music really exemplifies that. if you have a song like A Life Lived or something else, then you could definitely have your student listen to the inspiration or genres of music or composers that are in that similar vein of what's being played and take a look to see what you can pull from it. Category 2 is to make it practical. I'm going to start playing more of the songs so that you can hear what this sounds like as you're doing it with your student. For even the earliest students, I like to give them a bit of a challenge of being able to play with either the right hand or left hand. It's part of being a piano player. We can't really have a dominant hand because the music, it depends on what it is, which hand becomes the dominant one. In The Rabbit in the Garden, there is a part that a student could play either bringing out the right hand or the left hand. So if I go with my melody in my right hand, this is what it sounds like. Or what if I want the left hand melody? Imagine how much fun it would be for your student and a challenge for them to test out both a right hand melody or a left hand melody in that section and see which one they like best. For something like Jake Meets the Jackrabbit, oftentimes songs at this particular level, the left hand will either be emphasized on the first beat or the first and third beat. That's not the case here. It's actually the second and fourth beats where we have our left hand playing. So I literally bring my knees up and I show them on screen. Now, if you're doing this in person, you don't need to quite look like this. Right together, right together. Once your student is able to do that, then you can start adding in the next part. Having your student do this exercise with you, now you could do this either standing up or at the bench, but it helps them feel it in their larger muscle groups first. Sometimes it's about bringing out emotion with a simpler arrangement. It's not like there's a ton of notes or a ton of things to fill things out. And that's the case in Farewell Old Friend. Here I would recommend having a student play a short section and see how much can they pull the heartstrings. So there is more to that song, but this video would get too long if I go through all of it. In this particular case, even though maybe there isn't markings showing as such, you could think of it as each phrase and what are you going to do? So maybe it's reaching those heart notes. It could be pulling back dynamically at the end of the phrase. And so making it practical, really showing your student how to take it from I'm playing the notes and I'm playing it at the articulation and dynamic level I'm supposed to, and just adding that extra something that the audience is going to be like, oh, I so feel it. I'm not typically a huge fan of just getting students to repeat things because it doesn't really follow what we know about learning. Our brains, we need to keep adding different stimuli, different approaches so that it becomes stronger. Just repeating something the same way doesn't necessarily work as well or as efficiently. Waltz Under the Stars, where there's a modified pop arpeggio pattern, it can be a little tricky getting a student to be able to play it. And I would actually have the students start with the pop arpeggio, sort of, and then get them to add one note at a time. Depending on your student, you may be doing it one note at a time, or you might be doing it in little sections. The key with this particular piece, and with any piece, is looking at what the rhythm is as well. I noticed that my students tended to play all eighth notes and then hold the last note, which wasn't quite the rhythm. So that might be part of making it practical, focusing on the pattern and making sure that the rhythm is there as well. Sometimes the challenge comes from something that might be out of your student's hands. In my case, my hands. I have fairly small palms, and octaves for me can be quite a challenge. For the most part, I can play octaves, but I really have to pay attention to reducing the extension as much as possible and as quickly as possible. This is something for your students. Then if they're playing a life lived, for example, then you would need to focus in on relaxing those octaves. As your student is playing that small section, getting them to release their hand as quickly as possible. For example, when they're playing the eighth note, the pinky, it comes back into a relaxed position. And so your hand is shifting position as you're going along, but it does make for a healthier hand shape for your student. Category 3 is making it a friendly challenge, and I'm going to emphasize the word friendly. We don't want it to be stressful. We don't want parents all of a sudden, sending a message or calling saying, hey, my kid is super stressed out during the week. It's just not a great feeling going into a recital when, as a teacher, you're dealing with that. And obviously, we don't want our students feeling like that either. So for our young students, you could do something like in the rabbit in the garden, before they start playing, get them to actually be away from the piano, run over, and play. Another option for this song would be to play standing up. So you would just get them to move the bench, get them to set up, and off they would go. Younger students especially love this approach, and it actually feels a lot more comfortable many times than having their feet dangling if they're playing from their home piano. Another option is to have a student add a section or remove a section and see if you notice or anybody notices. So for example, in Jake Meets the Jackrabbit, there is a chromatic scale section. What if I remove a section? What does it sound like? You probably would have been able to tell if I did it that way because I had a little pause, but I have a feeling if I took that pause out, you might not have noticed. The key here is for your student to be intentional about what they add or they take out. There are plenty of times that students unintentionally leave things out, or in the case of one of my students, he added quite a bit to a song because he got lost in all of the verses and choruses. So we want it to be intentional, and by making it a challenge that you're going to be listening and you want them to trick you. Another great option is to have a student play things in a different order. This is especially important or a really great strategy if you have a song that has different emotions or that there's a story going on. So for example, in Farewell Old Friend, the overall mood is definitely reminiscence of someone that you've said goodbye, but it starts off rather melancholy. It goes into like kind of a more wholehearted, you've gathered yourself and your emotions together, and then it becomes wistful. Well, what happens if you change the order of those and suddenly you start off very resolute that you've got your emotions under control, but then perhaps you start feeling quite melancholy because you're not holding it together. And then you start feeling wistful as you realize that, it's okay. You've been able to say goodbye and you have these wonderful memories. This is a little different than just, here's the sections and we're going to roll a dice. This would be an intentional, how can I change the story or how can I change the overall mood of the piece by deciding what you want to change or what order you want them to go in. Something else you can do with your students to make it a bit of a challenge is for them to make a mistake and you won't notice. So this is a little different than you're adding a section or you're removing a section. Similar, but slightly different. In this case, you're going to try and play a different note or maybe a series of different notes. What if I was playing Waltz Under the Stars and I decided I wanted to play a little trick on my teacher? My left hand accompaniment pattern that I've been working so hard on. What if I change a few notes? What happens? For some of my students, they absolutely love this because they will try and make the smallest change possible to see if they can trip me up. And it becomes a bit of a competition, friendly competition between the two of us as I'm trying to figure out what they did. And they're just laughing because they think that they've tricked their teacher. Another option that you could do to make it a little bit of a friendly challenge is have your student clap or tap the first beat of each measure. So this becomes especially challenging in something like a life lived where your hands are moving and you've got a little bit more going on. Instead of what if you clap each one of those first beats? Really fun, right? Here's a list of the resources that will make your life a little easier and practice a little bit more fun, practical, and, those friendly challenges for your students as they prepare for a piano recital. The first one is best strategy to prepare students for a piano recital. Here it goes a lot more into the 3 categories that I talked about here. So if you're wondering what those might look like or a little bit more information about them, that's a really good option. The second one is the songs that I talked about. So The Rabbit in the Garden, Jack Meets the Jackrabbit, which by the way is a true story from my studio, Farewell Old Friend, Waltz Under the Stars, and A Life Lived. Those are all sheet music that you can find on my site. And then the last one is 5 ways recital prep activities. Many of the activities that I was showing you are ones that are included on there. And it's just a really colorful set of PDFs that students can choose the activities that best fit the song, but also the mood that they're in. And so it gets them engaged in their learning. You're not going to want to miss out on this recital prep series. There's a whole bunch of videos that are coming out with this one. So be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out, and be sure to check out the latest video in terms of recital prep.